All right, so we're going to continue on in chapter 7 when looking at expressions, specifically algebraic expressions, and we're going to be working with those as we move forward. Now, you're going to notice from behind me, this is not my room. I'm here on the weekend. You have to have at least 2 computers in order to record these, and I could only find one that I had access to, and that's Mrs. Reiner's. So I'm projecting from hers, recording on mine. We're good to go. All right, so when we look at what we're going to be doing, we're going to be plugging in information. It's called substitution. We're going to substitute numbers in for our variables. So let's go back and review since we had the weekend off. So SpongeBob tells us we have a few things we need to remember. We need to remember what coefficients are, what variables are, what constants are for these terms. So once again, terms are things in the math expression separated by addition and subtraction. So I know I have 2 terms here. My constant, which isn't in your book, but I said it's important for you to remember, is just a number hanging out there by itself that doesn't change because I'm not doing anything to it. So my 4 is my constant term. But I do have numbers and letters here, right? So I have my coefficient, and a coefficient just simply means a number multiplied by at least 1 letter. And I say at least because I have 2 letters here. Those are my variables. It means that variable means that there's a variety of them. And I can substitute any number that I want to in here that they tell me to. So I know I have numbers and letters that are touching. So once again, if they touch one another, 9 and x, it means to multiply. And in the same way, x and y are touching, so it's multiplying. So let's say I had a 2 for the x and a 3 for the y. My math problem would look like 9 times 2 times 3. And I'd have to do those steps, then add my 4 to it. So I also have to understand my order of operations, which we've talked about since early on in the school year. So evaluating expressions is what this title is for this lesson. And evaluating once again means just doing the math and solving for it. Expression just simply means a math problem without an answer that's there. So what we have is a math expression where we have a 3 and a 7, and I would have to plug those in and do the math to solve for it. So let's look at the example that they give us to start with. So we have a young guy here that wants to buy an MP3 player for his music. He knows that he has $25 that's saved up, so he's going to put that in his account. And he knows with his job and his chores, he can make $9 every single week. He needs $120. So how long is he going to work until he gets how much money he needs in order to buy it? Now, keep in mind, if you go in the store and there's a sign that says this is $120, and you pull out your pocket, you have $115, they're going to say, I need $5 more. You can't leave the store with this MP3 player. So I have to work until I have enough. Is it okay to have more than what they're asking for? Yeah, absolutely. It's always a good thing to have more, especially when we get into the section where we talk about taxes and we have to figure out how much taxes are. All right, so they said, well, let's just look at how much he would have if he worked for 8 weeks. So we're going to substitute for our W, which stands for weeks, an 8, because he's going to work 8 weeks. So when we set that up, we have to remember our order of operations and plug it into the math problem as we're doing it. So on our chart, they tell us that W is going to be equal to 8. We're going to substitute that in. Now, it's a variable, so we can change it as many times as we need to figure out how many weeks he has to solve. But we're just going to start with 8. So we're going to plug in the 8 where it says. So my first step is to write it down on my paper. Now, I'm going to strongly suggest, and most of you didn't want to, in all honesty, when it came to writing it down on notebook paper, I think I only had 1 of you that did it. Now, out of the 22 of you, there was probably 18 of you whose writing was neat enough that I didn't struggle to figure out where you messed up if you did. But there were 3 or 4 of you, I had no idea what your handwriting was telling me, so I couldn't help you figure out where you messed up on your math problems. I would strongly suggest when I'm doing my assignments, especially on these where I have step by step that I've suggested that you show, get the notebook paper. I have tons. We're not going to run out this year, and if we do, I'll go buy some more. It's fine. Use the notebook paper in the front of the room and show the work. Start by writing down the expression that's given to us. Once we have it written down, then we're going to substitute in for the variable that they've told us. They've told us that the 8 at this time is going to be substituted in for the W, which is for our weeks. Then we got to make sure that we follow our order of operations. Ask for several extra presents. absolute values, square roots, exponents, and parentheses all have to be done first. As of right now, we're only using exponents and parentheses. We know about absolute value, but we don't have those in our math problem. We don't know about square root yet. Then we have my dear, and that's multiplication and division, always from left to right. If multiplication comes first, we do it first. If division comes first, we do it first, followed by multiplication. Aunt Sally, addition and subtraction, also from left to right. No matter which one comes first, adding or subtracting, I do it first. Then I do the next. So I plug in and I substitute for my 8. Now I have 25 plus 9 times 8. I know according to my order of operations, I have to multiply first. 9 times 8 is 72, so I plug that in. Now I'm left with just adding. I'm going to add 25 and 72. 72 and 25 make 97. So I know after 8 weeks of working, he's going to have $97, which isn't enough. So below here, then, we have a chart. And it says, well, let's continue to fill out that information and follow those steps until I know how many weeks he has to work, so he has that $120. Remember, the formula always starts with, or the expression always starts with 25 plus, because he has $25 in his pocket that's saved up, and then he's going to be saving $9 for every week that he works. So now we're going to say, well, let's try working 9 weeks. Still, I'm adding $9 times, because I'm saving $9 for every week that I work, times a 9. Let's say we work 9 weeks. I'm going to start with that multiplication then, because order of operation tells me to, and 9 times 9 is 81. When I add 81 to 25, then I get the $106. Saving $106 is fantastic, but it's not enough to buy the MP3 player that he wants. So now I'm going to try for 10 weeks. That's where that 10 comes from in your book. I know that's where the W was, so we're going to try working for 10 weeks. Still have $25 in my pocket. I'm going to work for 9 weeks, or save $9 per week for 10 weeks. Well, what is 9 times 10? 9 times 10 is 90, plus the 25 that I already have, that's 115. I'm still $5 short. The store's not going to let me have my MP3 player. Now let's try 11. I plug the 11 in for the W. Still have $25 in my pocket. Still know I'm going to make $9 a week that I can save. I'm going to work for 11 weeks. Well, 9 times 11 is 99. 99 plus 25 is 124. I have more than I need, but that's fantastic because I have at least one I need, which is 120. So I know, now my question is, so how many weeks does he have to work? Well, he has to work 11 weeks. So when we do this week, we have to make sure we read what it's asking me to do instead of skimming, finding numbers, and just plugging them in. Solve for what it asks. And this asks for how many weeks does he have to work. All right. This one is just simply, here's the expression, and I'm going to substitute in for my M a number 14. So start by writing my expression on my paper. I have 4 times, in parentheses, M minus 11, divided by 3. All right, so when I do that then, I'm going to see if I can adjust this, because it looks like that light might be staying right where we're writing. Still doesn't look good. All right, so when I substitute the 14 in then, I've written my expression. I'm going to substitute in, just means to put in place of. So where my M is, I'm going to put a 14. Once I've done that, then I look at my order of operations. I have 4 times 14 minus 8 inside of my parentheses divided by 3. My order of operations tell me I have to start with parentheses. So 14 minus 8 has to be my first step. If I do a different step, I'm going to end up with different answers, and it's going to completely throw me off. So I have to start with my 14 minus 8, which gives me 6. Now, order of operations tells me to go from my dear, multiplication and division from left to right. So I'm going to start at the left, 4 times 6. 4 times 6 is 24. So 24 divided by 3 is my last step, and 24 divided by 3 is going to be 8. If you don't know that, then you have your handy dandy calculator. You can type it in, 24 divided by 3 equals, and you're going to see that it's 8. All right, so what about example 2 that they give us? Example 2 is a little longer. Now they've thrown in the exponents. Well, that's fine because we started with exponents in Chapter 7. We know how to do them, and we know where they fall in the order of operations. Has to be one of the first things that we do. Here's the thing. With absolute value, square roots, exponents, and parentheses, if they are inside of the parentheses, then I have to start with them first. Like this one has an exponent on the inside of the parentheses. I have to do the exponent first. However, we're going to see one where the exponent is on the outside of the parentheses. So I would have to do inside parentheses and then use my exponent to multiply it by itself however many times it says. I always start the same way. I write down the expression that we're talking about. Once I've written it down, then I'm going to substitute in the number or numbers, because we could have more than one, that they give me. I'm told that y is equal to 4. So I know I'm going to have 4 squared. Well, 4 squared looks like what? Because I have to start there according to my order of operations. I have to do that exponent inside those parentheses. 4 is my base, so it's what's get written down. Squared, the 2 is my exponent, so I have to write 4 times 4. 4 times 4 is 16. So when I find my exponent of 4 squared, that gives me 16. I'm left with my parentheses. Now I have 16 plus 2 that I have to do first. 16 plus 2 is 18. So now I'm just left with my multiplication and division from left to right. 3 times 18 is 54. So after all of that, if y is equal to 4, then I know I have 54. Once again, it's a variable, so it could be equal to any number I want to plug in there. At the end of Chapter 7, I'm going to insert, at the end of Chapter 7, I'm going to use integers. So we could plug in some positive and negative numbers in for that y, and that might change how we do things also. All right, so example 2 then says, the formula, so this is a math formula, something that we can do mathematically, it's always the same. It still appears that this is whiting out the board. Maybe that'll help. So I have 2 times L times W. So what that says is if I have a rectangle or a square, I could take 2 lengths and 2 widths. So length plus width, or I can take 2 times 1 length plus 2 times 1 width. Either way works. They're going to tell me to use that formula of 2L plus 2W and plug in some information. So I write down my formula, 2L plus 2W. And then I say, well, the perimeter tells me that the length, so my L, is 2.4. So I'm going to start to substitute in. 2 times, well, they tell me 2.4. And they tell me my width is 1.2. So I'm going to plug in 1.2. So I substitute in for both of those. 2.4, 1.2. And then I have to do my multiplication and division from left to right. So I'm going to multiply 2 times 2.4. Well, 2.4 on my handy-dandy calculator times 2 gives me 4.8. When I get 4.8, then I have to figure out what 2 times 1.2, 1.2 times 2 equals, well, that's going to give me my 2.4. So now I'm left with addition of decimals. Remember, stack your decimals. Make sure they're lined up. Because when I do 8 plus 4, then I end up with 12. So if I brought my decimal down, I'm going to put my 2 and carry my 1 so I can continue to add. But 4.8 plus 2.4, because I'm doing my dear Aunt Sally now, then I know that's going to give me 7.2. So the perimeter of the garden is 7.2 meters all the way around. All right, so now this says evaluate. Evaluate once again, solving a math problem. Okay, it doesn't have an expression, so it doesn't have an answer. All right, so we're doing less and less of giving you what is done, and you have to start doing it. So the first thing we do is we write down the expression that we're going to solve. So in your book, write down the expression that we're going to solve. Hopefully you write down 5k plus 6, because that's what should go on the first line. Then I'm going to substitute for what letters they tell me. So I have a variable of k, only one, so I'm going to plug in the 4 for the k. I have 5 touching k, which means multiplication. So I'm going to show my multiplication sign. 5 times 4. The reason I don't just leave them touching like 5k, because if I don't put the multiplication sign, then I end up with 54, which is really going to give me the wrong answer. So I showed that that's 5 times 4 by substituting for the k, which is the 4, and then I have to do my multiplication and division followed by my addition and subtraction. So I multiply 5 times 4. 5 times 4 is 20. Then I add 6 to it. 20 plus 6 gives me 26. So I evaluated this expression by substituting k is going to be equal to 4, and I get my answer of 26. All right, moving on. Here's how our problems are going to look tonight. We're going to be seeing math problems that are expressions, no answers given. I want to be substituting in for my variables. They're going to tell me what m is equal to, what b is equal to, what p is equal to. I'm going to use any coefficients that I have, a number that's going to be multiplied by that variable. I start by writing out my math problem, m minus 9. I substitute in for that variable. They tell me that m is equal to 13, so I'm going to have 13 minus 9. And then 13 minus 9, that goes all the way back to first and second grade. I know that that's 4. I'm finished. Easy enough. Moving on. Number 3, 16 minus 3b. Keep it in my mind that 3 touching b is multiplication, so I know according to my old order of operations, I know that's going to have to be one of my first steps. So I write it down, 16 minus 3b. I now substitute in for the b, and if I just put in a 4, that ends with 34, and I don't want to make that mistake, so I show that it's multiplication. 16 minus 3 times 4, and then that lets me do my order of operations by focusing in on the multiplication. 3 times 4 is going to be 12. So I'm left with 16 minus 12, and that gives me 4 again. Well, I wonder if 4 is going to be 4. It's not. Now I have p squared plus 4. So I have to write that expression down and then substitute in for the p. And they tell me p is equal to 6. So if p is equal to 6, 6 squared would look like, well, the base is 6. The exponent is 2. So I have to have 6 times 6. And 6 times 6, according to my multiplication of doubles that I learned in 3rd and 4th grade, is 36. I bring everything else down. 36 plus 4 is 40. All right. Well, now I have a word problem. Oh, we hate word problems. The formula A is equal to LW. I don't know what that means. Well, number one, it really doesn't matter if you know what it means or not, but you really should. A is always going to be equal to area. Area is always found by length times width. And a letter touching a letter means multiplication. So it's saying if I find the area of length times width for this rectangle, and they tell me that length is 12 and my width is 8. So I have length times width as my expression or my formula in this case. I know that my length is going to be 12 and my width, my W, is going to be 8. So I'm going to have 12 times 8. Take my handy dandy calculator, 12 times 8 equals, I get 96. What's my label? So on these, we need to start learning, if we haven't already, and maybe some of you have, I think a lot of you actually have. Anytime I'm finding area, my label is always squared, always. But I told you something last week, just to remind you, just in case. When my labels are the same, and they are multiplied together, it means it has an exponent of 2, or that it's squared. And I know that I have 12 feet, and I have 8 feet. So feet times feet means that I have feet with a 2, which means feet squared. So that area is going to be 96 square feet. All right, moving on. A couple more practice problems here. 6, 7, and 8. So I'm given, once again, my expressions, a math problem without an answer. I know I'm going to start by writing it down. I know I'm going to do my second step, which is to substitute any letter that they give me, that variable, for the number that it has to be in this problem. And then I'm going to follow my order of operations. I'm going to do my absolute value, square roots, exponents, and parentheses. Remember, right now we're just doing exponents in parentheses, and then I'm going to do my multiplication and division from left to right, ending with any addition and subtraction from left to right. My first step, write the expression. So this one is 7s plus 5. 7 is touching s. It's a coefficient touching a variable. S has to be equal to what? Well, they tell me that s has to be equal to 3. So I'm going to show now. 7 times 3 plus 5. That tells me I have to multiply it first. 7 times 3 is 21 plus 5 is going to be brought down. And then my final step is just adding those together. 21 plus 5 is 26. So I know that that expression is equal to 26. All right, so for 7, first step, write down my expression. Notice that I have a constant and another term, which is a coefficient and a variable. I'm going to substitute for my variable. So it tells me that d is equal to 5. So I'm going to show 21 minus 4 times, and it tells me that d is 5. So 21 minus 4 times 5 tells me 4 times 5 has to be done according to my order of operations. 4 times 5 is 20. So I'm left with 21 minus 20. Well, that's just 1. All right, number 8. Here's where I said that exponent could be on the outside of the parentheses. T minus 6 squared, so that's all in parentheses, and I square it. And if t is equal to 11, so I have to write down my expression. In parentheses, t minus 6. On the outside, it's going to be squared or to an exponent of 2. I have to solve inside parentheses first, but my first step is to substitute. So I'm going to put in my 11 for my t, 11 minus 6. Solve for my parentheses. 11 minus 6 is 5. So I'm left with 5 squared. Now on that one, I kept the parentheses, notice, but you don't have to. You can have just 5 squared by itself, but you can add the parentheses around it. It doesn't matter. You're still going to show a 5 times a 5 and multiply them together. 5 times 5 is 25. All right, so now is your turn. I want you to skip 9. You can work with me on number 9 if we're really struggling, and I'll walk you through it. But let's jump to 10 and 11. I want you to work these out. Do it on scrap paper if you'd like. Do it in your book. I don't care as long as you're showing me the steps. When you come back and say, well, I don't really get it, I'm going to ask, let me see your book. Everyone should be filling out their book. It's what I expect from everyone. So everyone should be doing it. I want you to solve for 10 and 11. Come back and check the video. If you want, start with 10 just to make sure you have it correct, and then go to 11. All right, so hopefully you have an answer for number 10 at the very least. So when you started, you wrote down the expression. They give you 2 times k squared minus 2, and that last term is in parentheses, or that last step is in parentheses. So you substitute in the 6 for the k. That tells you have to do your exponent first, which is 6 times 6, and 6 times 6 is 36. When you subtract those then, because it's inside of parentheses, they have to be done first. 36 minus 2 gave you 34. Then you would have multiplied 2 times 34, which gave you 68. So hopefully everyone got there. If you didn't, figure out which step you messed up on. Maybe you did it in the wrong order. Maybe you jumped ahead and you said, well, I have 2 times 36, and you multiplied those first, and then subtracted 2. Got to do exponents first. All right, so if you haven't done 11, pause the video now and do it. Come back to me. And if you have done it, then check to make sure this is your right answer. You should end up with 35 as your final answer. So you start by writing out the problem, 5 times, in parentheses, f minus 32, divided by 9. I have to start by substituting in my variable. So my f is 95, so it goes inside my parentheses. Parentheses has to be done first in this math problem according to order of operations. So 95 minus 32 is 63. Now what do I do first? Well, some of you may want to divide first. Some of you may want, we have to start with multiplication and division because multiplication is first. Then I can do my division because it's second. If they were flopped, then I could do division first. Have to do multiplication first. So I have to take 5 times 63. 5 times 63 is 315. Then I can divide by 9, and 315 divided by 9 gives me 35. If you didn't get the right answers, you're still struggling, come back to me. We'll work through number 9 together, and you'll tell me what you're doing, but I'll help give you some guidance. I can have some extra practice problems if you want some help with those. All right, so we're just evaluating our basic algebraic expressions. Expressions, math problems without an answer, substituting in an algebra for what they tell me that my letters are equal to, my variables. I have 2 through 11 on page 385, and then 1 through 6 on page 386. If you have any questions, you come back to the back of the room and ask for help. And if I'm busy with someone else and you don't want to wait for me, I'm sure someone at your table would be happy to help you.